Hello and welcome to the Sonic Cinema podcast. My name is Brian Scuttle and thank you for joining me at www.sonic-cinema.com. Join me at Sonic Cinema Patreon at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema. There you'll enjoy early access reviews, exclusive commentary, and audio takes on my music as well as movies. I have some video that I took during Dragon Con this past year that I shared with patrons uh, this past month, as well as a bunch of other stuff as far as talking about my book, talking about different things as far as film goes. And that is all at patreon.com/SonicCinema. I hope you join me with that. Um, Today I am doing a bit of a different podcast. I had a few other episodes that I had in mind for uh, this month in addition to the Dragon Con one, but I decided to do something a little bit different, and part of it was somewhat inspired by Dragon Con. We're going to be looking at a couple of films that I have a personal connection to, not in the sense that I didn't work on these films, I didn't help make these films, but these are films that have had a profound impact on me the past couple of years. Surprisingly enough, they're both superhero movies. We'll begin with a bit of backstory on me. If you're not familiar with this already, I think I've talked about at times in certain different reviews. And I think one of the movies that I'm discussing today, I discussed that in my review. Um, if you had asked me 11 years ago on this day what my life might be like 10 years from then, I wouldn't have been able to tell you, not just because I, I can't predict how my life was going to go, but I also wouldn't have been able to tell you because I was actually in a medically induced coma at that point. It was on September 21st in 2007. I was hospitalized with pneumonia and a collapsed lung. And part of that was a lot of that had to do with the fact that I was not taking care of myself physically the way that I should have. I'd been coughing and been diagnosed asthmatic for a couple of years, but I wasn't really taking care of myself the way I should. And the week leading up to the 21st, I was very, very short of breath to the point where I could barely sleep. And then one night I went to work and I wasn't able to finish my shift. And so my general manager sent me home. And then I tried to go home. I tried to get comfortable. I couldn't. My parents took me to the emergency room where I was admitted into the ER immediately because my face was purple. And the last thing I remembered was going back to one of the beds and laying down and then closing my eyes. And the next time when I woke up, uh, I was in ICU. It was a Sunday. It was Sunday the 30th. Um, I remembered it was a Sunday because football was on. And I did not realize until I was still kind of out of it. Because, I mean, if they put you in a medically induced coma, that means that they're pumping you with drugs for specific reasons. And so that's I was a bit groggy for a couple of days there, and then I had the realization with when a couple of fellow managers, including my future wife, came to visit, that I had been I missed not just the weekend because it was a Friday when I went into the hospital. I'd missed 8 days, so that was 8 days of my life that I will never get back, and that moment had profound impact on me, and it forced me to realize that I really needed change what I was doing physically. And you know, I will be the first to admit that um I haven't completely done that, but the fact of the matter is 11 years later, in a much better place physically now than I was then. Before my hospitalization, it occurred to me that there were also emotional issues and mental issues that I wasn't taking care of as well. And that, but I was still not quite at the point where I was ready to take care of them. And partial and partially inspired by my physical struggles in this time, I ended up getting to the point where I had to tackle those head on myself. And so for the past 10 years, I've been in therapy, starting out in group therapy because that was really the most comfortable way for me to start out, and then gradually going into individual therapy about 6 years ago. Um, all of this is prologue to the two movies that I'm wanting to discuss a little bit today. And the first one, what came out right around this time, it was Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 3, which a lot of fans of Sam Raimi's run at the Spider-Man series is the less the their least favorite for a lot of reasons, and they're valid reasons. If you were excited about Venom, if you were excited about, if you're not really a fan of emo Peter Parker in the movie, I certainly completely understand that, and those are completely valid reasons. But the thing that I loved about this, and why I loved about it at the time, and why I still love about it, is that, and what I love about it even more is, and this boils down to my personal journey at this point, was the fact that um, I feel like Sam Raimi told a very uh, spot on Peter Parker story. I think his story of where he takes Peter Parker, and yeah, Venom was basically forced on him by the studio. It's like, oh, we have to use Venom, and it's like he didn't want to, but he and his brother Ivan, who wrote the script, made it work, and they made it work because of the fact that they made the symbiote that basically turns him into Black Suit Spider-Man a part of the story that Raimi was telling as far as Sandman, because Sandman in this movie is, for a time, we think that he's the one who killed Uncle Ben. And so that's one of the things that Sam Raimi, I think, did so beautifully in Spider-Man 3, is the fact that even though he didn't want Venom in the movie, even though he didn't want to necessarily do that storyline, and it does feel very tacked on the way it is, but the fact of the matter is, I think he worked it in beautifully, because it's you basically have Peter Parker um, on top of the world in terms of his emotional, um, him personally, as far as being able to balance everything with Spider-Man and Peter Parker, school, Spider-Man, Mary Jane, all of that, and then all of a sudden this monkey wrench in terms of Sandman comes into play, and then you have the symbiote that latches onto him, and all of a sudden that um that good feeling he's had just basically wipes away, and it basically takes him to a place that he's not comfortable. He doesn't necessarily, he likes going to, but at the same time shows his personal limitations at that point. And that's one of the things that, when Spider-Man 3 came out, that's something that I really identified with because I was going through that emotional journey myself, and it's something that really resonated with me. And yeah, I'm just as much of not a fan of the of how ridiculous Peter Parker is after the black suit he becomes Black Suit Spider Man, and just how cocky and arrogant and ridiculous he is, and when things go south with Mary Jane, and um, it's one of those, and it's absurd. I can't stand it, but the fact of the matter is, I still feel like the way Raimi tells that story, and the way Tobey Maguire sells that story, and the way everybody sells that story is it's terrific. It's really spot on for the emotional journey that I think that Raimi was trying to take Peter on. And so I think that I felt that Raimi made it work. I mean, I think probably it's it's easily my favorite of the three movies, even though I think Spider-Man 2 is the better film. I think overall, I think Spider-Man 3 is my favorite because of the personal journey and the emotional journey that Peter Parker goes on. And then you have that amazing scene in the church after he's basically hit his worst moment with MJ and inadvertently causing her harm. And that's that's at that moment where it's like he hits his rock bottom and he realizes get he needs to change. And that's one of my that's always been one of my favorite moments in the movie. And then you have the scene in the church where gets rid of he gets the symbiote off of him, and uh Brock happens to be there and becomes Venom, and the rest of the movie ensues. But there's so many just great there's so many great emotional beats, I think, in that movie. And the thing that is always just fantastic to me about Spider-Man 3 is it's it's that it's that emotional turmoil that Raimi puts Peter in, that's beyond anything he's seen in the previous movies, and really anything I think we've seen in any of the Spider-Man movies. And the way he pulls out of it in a believable fashion, in a way that really I think can connect with a lot of people who have had those struggles in their own lives. And that's one of the and yeah, Spider-Man 3 is entertaining. It's got good moments. It's got not so great moments, but ultimately it is that personal story that is really effective. And so when I was hospitalized, when I was working on getting my physical health back, it's like that's one of those movies that when that I really respond to. And I respond to it before that happened, but I respond to it even more then because I felt like it's like, okay, I was at my lowest moment. Now it's about, you know, how do I get back to, how do I get back there to where I want to be? And that's one of the things I've always loved about Spider Man 3. And it's also something that really connected with me when it came to the second movie that I want to touch on. I mean, this is going to be a shorter one, but it's also going to be a bit more personal. And it's another Marvel movie, but it's from the official Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's Scott Derrickson's Doctor Strange. Came out a couple of years ago. And it's probably one of my favorite MCU origin stories, and probably one of my favorite MCU movies, period. Um, this and it's interesting because mean Benedict Wong, hashtag Team Wong, um, at Dragon Con this is sort of like where the idea for this episode came from, because um one of the things that I really liked about Doctor Strange, the thing that really resonates with me is the emotional journey, is the spiritual journey of Stephen Strange throughout that movie. And watching it after watching the movie again after Dragon Con really hit me even more so, just how much this reflects this this movie reflects the exactly the journey that I found myself on after my hospitalization, because Strange's story in this movie is not just about getting his body back to where it can do the things that he could do before. It's also about realizing that he has to find something in himself. He's got to change himself emotionally. He's got to open himself up emotionally in a way that he's uncomfortable with. And because of the fact that he's just not really wanting to, that's why he has such a hard time when he starts out, is that the spiritual part of that is the part that makes him uncomfortable. The emotional part of dealing with his trauma, the physical stuff, he's a brilliant surgeon. He knows what he needs to do in that respect. He knows what he wants to do to get himself back into that realm. But the thing that he has to realize throughout that movie, and especially at the beginning of that movie when he goes out and searches for the Ancient One, and to see what the one patron played by Benjamin Bratt discovered, and how he got healed, is that there's a spiritual connection to not just his body, but just this idea of faith that doesn't really mix with the um, analytical part of our brains, unless we really are pushed to figure it out for ourselves. And that's one of the things that, and this is where like Doctor Strange really connects with me even more than Spider-Man 3 did, because Spider-Man 3 happened at the moment, but Doctor Strange, watching it again recently, it felt like a reflection of what I went through. Because not only am I having to sort of put my body together and make sure my body is healthy and able to continue on, but also it occurred to me that how much I need to get my mind straight, and how much I need to get myself into a mindset to where it's like I'd fallen off of, the more you realize when how broken your mind can be, that's the moment where you can really start to heal that and really become aware of how much how much growth there is, uh, that we need to get to. And that's the thing that makes Doctor Strange's journey in that movie so powerful to me. I mean, the movie is fantastic visually. Derrickson does a great job with the images, and it's an exciting adventure movie. But it's that personal part of it, um, that just it it's like Spider-Man 3, where it's like that personal aspect of it just really, there's something about it that resonates with me. And it's like, and the thing I wrote down as I was coming up with the idea of this podcast was, it's like Doctor Strange's story was me figuring out who I was after hitting my emotional bottom, almost after almost dying from my own carelessness. And that's very true. That's exactly what happened, is because I got careless in my life physically, and I was literally minutes away from dying. And so it occurred to me as I got out of the hospital, as I tried to get my health back to where it was, to where I could resume my regular life, that I had work to do mentally. But it wasn't until months later that I realized just how far off the beaten path I'd gotten, and that I needed to figure out a way to get to that place where I was not only physically healthy, but emotionally healthy and mentally healthy as well. And that was the harder journey. And that's the journey that Strange finds himself in that movie. That's the journey Peter Parker finds himself in that movie. And that's one of the things that's the main thing that I wanted to talk about and wanted to shine light on why those two movies in particular mean a lot to me. Um, so there's not too much. I didn't really want to talk too much about them on a critical standpoint, because I mean you can read my reviews. My reviews, I still feel the same way about the movies now from a critical standpoint that I did when I saw them in 2007 and 2016 respectively. This was more about sharing something, uh, sort of how these movies relate to me on a personal level, and just sort of digging into that a bit as far as the way that storytellers, like Scott Derrickson's, like Sam Raimi, which is funny because both of them are horror filmmakers, traditionally horror filmmakers who found themselves making large blockbuster movies and find something personal to say in them. And that's one of the things that is impressive, and that's why it's hard to really um, pigeonhole genre filmmakers within genre, because ultimately filmmakers of any genre are capable of stories that go deeper. And Raimi and Derrickson in these movies certainly I feel did that to me personally, and I think they probably did to other people, beyond just being entertaining movies. And I mean, these aren't the only genre movies that I've had this type of impact on, but they're two that have had a deeper and usual impact on me. And just thinking about how far I've come in the past 10, 11 years since um, since my hospitalization, since I started therapy, it was just something I wanted to discuss, and just sort of a big convergence of events, sort of inspired me to talk about them. So that's all that I really have for now. In October, it's gonna be October Horror Month again for me personally. I don't know. I've got at least one horror. I've got at least a couple of horror related ones, as well as podcasts in mind, as well as another one on a filmmaker can who's known for horror of a different kind, and a friend of mine and I will be hopefully discussing that, as well as if you go to patreon.com/Sonic Cinema, I'll have a little bit more on. I'll have a couple of early access reviews, and hopefully one for one of the classics, beloved classics of the genre, and maybe I'll probably do another early access review too. Not quite sure what that other movie will be, but we'll see. Um, anyway, for now though, that is my name's Brian Scuttle. Thank you very much for joining me on the Sonic Cinema podcast, and thank you very much.